Combat Broadsword. With me, your host, Justin Phillips, and Matt, our official Broadsword punching bag. Thank you for being here, Matt. We got a question on one of our videos. Someone was asking about stabbing and or poking. I like that terminology, by the way. Using the broadsword. They said they'd seen it in some Tai Chi and some Wushu forms, but we hadn't really talked about it so much. And I'll be honest, we hadn't talked about it because stabbing is not one of the primary forms of attack with a broadsword. You can stab with a broadsword, no question about it. It's got a pointy tip. You can poke someone with it. But because of what we've talked about so much, because broadsword is often fought with a bent arm, it's fought using two hands simultaneously and often from very close, the stab is not a primary form of attack, because really, a stab is a much more extended distance sort of attack. But you can do it. It is a reasonable question, so we're going to talk about it. Obviously, with a stab, what I'm doing is I'm taking this pointy part and I'm sticking it in the other guy. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk less about stabbing versus an opponent, and I'm just going to talk a little bit more about the basic mechanics of stabbing, because that's going to be, I think, a lot more useful to you. And this is actually fairly true regardless of the sword you're stabbing with, because stabbing with a broadsword, not really that dramatically different than stabbing with, say, a straight sword. Because a sword is a sword, and if you stick it in someone else, you have executed a stab. Congratulations. Things to bear in mind. You'll see people and they stab like this, almost like it's a knife. Ah, ah. That can be relatively effective if I'm stabbing into the lower body, but in general, that's not a habit I want to be in. I don't typically want to stab straight up and down, because if I'm stabbing into the upper body, I've got ribs. Ribs run this way. If I stab this way, it's much easier for the blade to wedge between the ribs, get stuck, and not really penetrate inward. What I want to do is I want to stab flat, and that way the sword can pass more easily through the rib cage. So what I'm going to do is when I stab, I want to stab flat. Now, this is in great contrast to how we actually see it in most of the Tai Chi forms. Typically when you see a stab, you have these very flat stabbing motions. But there are some upward stabs. For instance, in the straight sword form, we see hornet flies through the hole where we're going to stab flat. And we want to keep that flat stab in mind, because again, what we're doing, whether we're palm up or palm down, is we're allowing ourselves to pass between the rib cage as opposed to getting stuck. Now, the other thing that I want to bear in mind with a stab is, where does a stab come from? And this is really, really important, because if I am going to stab, I need accuracy. If I'm attacking with a slash, then that slash is going to cover a pretty broad area. That slash is going to come through, and I've got a lot of coverage. Accuracy is still important. I still want to be able to hit to tendons, edge of the knees, below the rib cage, wherever it is I'm trying to hit, I want to hit that target. But because I've got that slash, I've got a lot more travel with the blade, I'm much more likely to hit a broader target. Stab is going to be one line of attack. So with a stab, I'm going to have to be much more accurate. I've got a single line of attack. So I've only got a single point of target, so I have to be much more accurate. So how do I create accuracy with a stab? Well, the first way I'm going to create accuracy with a stab is practice. I'm just going to stab a lot. One of my favorite target practice methods excuse me, is I'm going to hang a tennis ball on a string, start it swinging, and then try to hit it. You could also chase toddlers with a sword. Don't let Child Protective Services find out. But you can hit that tennis ball. That's going to be a really good way to do that. Now, the other thing I want to bear in mind is body mechanics. And this is where we get to a little bit different, because we talk all the time in Tai Chi about everything coming from the waist. And in broadsword, that's no different. When I'm making a cut, I want to drive that from the waist. I want that power behind it because it's a strong, decisive cut. But with a stab, I have a very small surface area that is typically sharp that I'm trying to drive through tissue. So I don't necessarily have to have quite as much force. That's not to say that I want my stab to be weak or forceless, but it doesn't have to be quite as forceful. What that means is, rather than trying to drive so much force out of the hip where I'm pushing with the hand and the tip can potentially wander around, I really want to think of the tip of the sword. Now, this is very common in straight sword. They talk about in straight sword the energy is entirely in the tip. So rather than driving with the hand, what I want to do is I want to lead with the tip. I want to almost imagine that there's a string tied to the tip of the weapon and attached to the place I'm trying to thrust. And what happens is that string starts to pull and draws the tip into my target. Okay? And what's going to happen is, as that tip leads out, that's then going to pull my arm and then pull my body. The other thing that sort of mechanic does is, because I'm leading with the tip before I move the body, rather than having to deal with the movement of my body, potentially pulling my tip off target, I have a very stable platform as the tip travels to its target, and if I don't quite reach, then I can extend through from the target, and that's going to make me much more accurate with the tip. So, palm down, palm up, Either direction is okay. Leading with the tip, that's what I want to think about when I'm trying to stab or thrust or poke with either a straight sword or a broadsword, or really any of the other weapons. I want to make sure that I'm letting that tip guide me in. I want to make sure that I'm keeping the body in line behind that, because I do want to be able to drive out of the waist. Almost like Xingyi, where I'm going to put the body in position and then drive the weapon forward. I'm going to come in and drive that weapon through, okay? So those are going to be the basic principles behind a stab. If you have any other questions about that, please let us know. If you have other questions about other broadsword stuff, let us know, because we love to answer questions, because it means we don't have to come up with themes for these videos. Hey! Okay? Make sure you click on a like so everybody knows how great we are. Please feel free to share this video around. Definitely subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of our great content. We'll see you guys next time.